Remember that feeling, maybe last summer or the one before, when things just felt off? Maybe with that wildfire smoke hanging around for weeks, or a storm that just seemed way too intense for your neighborhood. Well, these things aren't really just weird one-offs anymore, are they? It feels like part of a bigger pattern. And today we're going to dive deep into a really crucial document that helps us understand that pattern. It's the 5th National Climate Assessment, or NCA-5. Now, this isn't some dusty report sitting on a shelf. Think of it more like the official U.S. guide to climate change right now. It's packed with the latest science, all aimed at helping all of us make smarter choices. It's actually mandated by Congress, a huge effort involving tons of federal agencies, all reviewed by top scientists, and this is important, brings in indigenous knowledge too. And it's super current, published late 2023, updated again March 2024. So, it's really the state of the art, our mission today, to kind of cut through the noise, give you the highlights, the aha moments without you having to read all, hundreds of pages. We want you to feel really informed fast. Okay, so let's unpack this thing. The NCA-5 kicks off with some pretty stark observations, right, about what's already happening here in the U.S.
It does, and I think the absolute headline finding, stated with very high confidence, mind you, is that human activities, mostly burning fossil fuels, have, and they use the word unequivocally, caused the warming we've seen globally.
Unequivocally. That's strong.
It is. But here's what's really key for us. The U.S. itself is warming even faster than the global average.
Faster.
Okay.
That's significant.
Yeah. So the impacts are potentially hitting us harder and faster here.
And the report, it mentions key advances since the last one in, 2017, 2018. What's new? What have we learned just in the last few years?
There have been some really significant steps forward. For one, scientists have sort of narrowed down the uncertainty about future warming.
Oh.
Yeah, how much warming we get if CO2 doubles. They've now got that range down to between 4.5 and 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 2.5 to 4.0 Celsius. Much tighter range.
Okay, more certainty there. What else?
And maybe even more fascinating is what they call improved attribution.
Attribution.
Meaning they can now better figure out climate change's specific role in individual extreme weather events. Like, remember Hurricane Harvey back in 2017?
Oh, yeah, devastating.
Well, the report estimates that climate change made the rainfall during Harvey somewhere between 15% and 20% worse.
Wow. So we can actually quantify the climate change fingerprint on a specific storm like that now.
Exactly. That kind of precision is a major advance. It moves it from the general to the very specific.
Okay, so we're seeing the science get sharper. What does this mean for what we're actually experiencing, on the ground?
It means, and the report is very clear on this, that extreme events are becoming more frequent and severe. That's the key phrase.
More frequent, more severe. Like what specifically?
Well, think about heat waves, more common, more intense, especially out west. Drought risk increased, particularly in the Southwest. Heavy rain events getting more extreme, particularly east of the Rockies.
Yeah.
And hurricanes aren't just forming, they're intensifying faster, dropping more rain, pushing bigger storm surges. And then there are the wildfires in the west, more frequent, burning larger areas. It's across the board, really.
And the cost.
Yeah.
We always hear about these billion-dollar disasters. What's the trend there? Is it really getting that much worse?
Oh, the numbers are genuinely staggering.
Yeah.
Get this. Back in the 1980s, the U.S. saw one of these inflation-adjusted billion-dollar disasters about every 4 months.
Okay, 4 months.
Now, on average, it's one every 3 weeks.
Every 3 weeks. Seriously.
Seriously. And just between 2018 and 2022, there were 89 of these events. The cost, close to $150 billion per year.
Wow. $150 billion a year.
And that's probably a conservative estimate. It doesn't fully capture loss of life, healthcare costs, things like that. You look at states like Texas, $375 billion in damages from 1980 to 2022, or Hurricane Ian in Florida, $113 billion from just one storm.
It's incredible. And that $150 billion a year, that doesn't just disappear, right? That cost eventually affects, everyone.
Absolutely. It ripples through the economy. Think insurance premiums, local budgets, infrastructure repair costs, even the price of groceries eventually. It touches everyone.
So it sounds like these things aren't just happening in isolation. Wildfires here, floods there. They're connected.
Precisely. The report really stresses these cascading and compounding impacts.
Cascading and compounding, like a domino effect.
Sort of, yeah. Think about a wildfire. It doesn't just burn trees. The smoke affects air quality hundreds, even thousands of miles away, right?
We've all seen those hazy skies.
Or think about how a climate disaster, like a hurricane, hits an area that's already dealing with other problems, like, say, poverty or maybe even a pandemic. It makes everything worse.
Hmm.
They give the example of that crazy Pacific Northwest heat wave in June 2021. Climate change made it 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. That heat, combined with the ongoing drought,
A brutal combination.
led to over 1,400 deaths, a terrible wildfire season that followed, fish dying off in rivers, and damages over $38 billion. It's all linked. Which, raises a really important question.
Who gets hit hardest by all this?
Exactly.
Which brings us straight to the equity issue, doesn't it?
It really does. The report is explicit. Climate change exacerbates inequities. It hits vulnerable populations the hardest.
Who are we talking about specifically?
Low-income communities, communities of color, tribes, indigenous peoples, they often have fewer resources to cope. Maybe less access to things like good flood defenses or green spaces for cooling or even just safe, well-insulated housing.
And there's that connection to historical issues too, right? Like redlining.
Yes, absolutely. The report points out that areas historically subjected to redlining those discriminatory housing practices can be significantly hotter during heat waves, sometimes up to 12 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than nearby wealthier neighborhoods.
12 degrees hotter, just based on historical housing policy. That's
Right.
shocking.
It is, and looking forward, the projections show that Black communities, for example, are expected to bear a disproportionate burden of future flood damages. It's layering risk onto existing inequality.
Okay, so we see the big picture, the interconnectedness, the equity issues. Let's drill down a bit into specific areas. How is this affecting something absolutely fundamental, like our water?
Yeah, water is a huge concern. Safe, reliable water is definitely under threat. And it's kind of a tale of two extremes.
Okay.
On one hand, you've got more intense heavy rainfall, especially in the Northeast and Midwest. That leads to more flooding, urban flooding, agricultural flooding. They found corn yield losses from floods between 81 and 2016 were almost as bad as losses from extreme drought.
Wow, floods hitting crops that hard too.
Yeah. But then, on the other hand, you have droughts. They're getting more intense, lasting longer, happening more often, particularly out in the Southwest. That puts immense strain on rivers, reservoirs, groundwater, everything.
So too much water sometimes, not nearly enough other times.
Exactly. And those droughts and the heat waves that often go with them, the report estimates they caused something like $328 billion in damages between 1980 and 2022. It's a massive water security challenge.
And flowing from water, what about our food systems? Is climate change making food less secure?
It's definitely causing increasing instabilities. That means nutritious food can become less available, more expensive.
And who feels that pinch the most?
Again, it tends to disproportionately hit vulnerable groups, women, children, low-wealth communities, farmers, ranchers, fishers. They're all on the front lines, facing risks from higher temperatures, unpredictable rain, new pests and diseases, potential crop failures.
And fishing too.
Oh, yeah. Fisheries are facing a triple threat. Warming waters, changing where fish live, invasive species moving in, and ocean acidification harming shellfish. And the report really highlights how indigenous peoples, who often rely heavily on traditional food sources, are seeing those sources severely impacted.
It's hitting basic needs: water, food. What about shelter? Our homes, our communities.
Also increasingly at risk, homes, property, critical infrastructure, they're more exposed than ever. Think about the coasts. 40% of the U.S. population lives in coastal counties. That's 123 million people.
Wow, 40%.
Yeah, and they're facing rising sea levels. The report projects millions could be at risk of displacement just from sea level rise by the end of this century.
Millions displaced within the U.S.
Potentially, yes. And even away from the coast, think about heat waves. They pose serious health risks, especially for people in poorly insulated homes, often in those low-income or historically redlined areas we talked about that get much hotter.
And the infrastructure that everything relies on: roads, power, services.
That's taking a beating, too. Our vital systems, transportation, energy grids, water treatment, public services, they're getting damaged more often, disrupted more easily.
And a lot of it is old, right? Not built for this.
Exactly. A lot of infrastructure is nearing the end of its lifespan anyway, and it certainly wasn't designed for the kind of climate stresses we're seeing now and projecting for the future. Railways buckling in extreme heat, storm drains getting overwhelmed by intense rain, coastal roads and buildings facing permanent flooding.
It's systemic vulnerability.
It really is. The report mentions Hurricanes Irma and Maria, for instance, and how they completely knocked out medical care access in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico for extended periods. That's critical infrastructure failure with immediate life-or-death consequences.
Let's pivot slightly to health more broadly. How is all this climate change impacting our well-being? Physically, mentally?
The report uses that word again, unequivocally harming human health. Physical health, mental health, spiritual well-being, community health, it's hitting all levels.
So, what are the main pathways?
Well, obviously, the direct impacts of extreme events, injuries, deaths, but also increases in infectious diseases as vectors like mosquitoes and ticks expand their range. Worsening air quality is a big one.
From wildfire smoke, mostly.
Wildfire smoke is a major contributor, yeah, causing premature deaths, triggering asthma attacks, but also ground-level ozone, which is often worse on hot, sunny days. Plus, threats to food and water security, we already discussed that those are health issues too.
And again, does this hit everyone equally?
No, it's an established fact, according to the report, that marginalized groups, BIPOC communities, low-wealth individuals, people working outdoors, face disproportionately worse health outcomes from climate change. They even note how climate disasters happening during the COVID-19 pandemic made things even worse for essential workers and vulnerable communities, amplifying both exposure risk and the severity of the illness. It just keeps compounding.
We focus a lot on human impacts, understandably. But what about the natural world itself? Ecosystems, wildlife.
Yeah, the report states that ecosystems are undergoing transformational changes. That's a pretty dramatic phrase.
Transformational changes. What does that look like?
It means widespread biodiversity loss, for one. Ecosystems are providing fewer of the services we rely on, like clean water or pollination. Species are literally shifting where they live, moving north or to higher elevations if they can.
Right.
We're seeing devastating losses of coral reefs due to ocean warming and acidification. Along the coasts, rising seas are turning forests into marshes or open water. They call them ghost forests.
Ghost forests, wow.
And the warning is stark. Without major cuts in emissions, the report expects irreversible ecological transformations by the middle to latter part of this century. Irreversible, that's a heavy word.
It really is. And all these impacts, ecological, health, infrastructure, it must add up economically. What's the overall picture for the U.S. economy?
The assessment is blunt. Climate change slows economic growth. It's not just the cost of disasters, it's a drag on the whole system.
How does that work?
Well, every extra bit of warming makes the damage worse, and it accelerates. So, for example, warming by 2 degrees Fahrenheit is projected to cause more than double the economic harm compared to warming by 1 degree Fahrenheit. It's not a linear increase.
Okay, so the damages ramp up quickly with more warming.
Exactly. And this affects everything. Trade, global supply chains, government budgets trying to cope with recovery costs, and ultimately household budgets through higher prices for goods and services. It makes the whole economy less stable, less resilient.
And jobs. Is climate change a job killer, or does it create new opportunities? What's the outlook there?
It's definitely shifting job opportunities. The report acknowledges there will be job losses, particularly in fossil fuel-related industries.
Right, that's a major concern for those communities.
Absolutely. But the report projects that those losses will be completely offset by greater increases in mitigation-related jobs.
Mitigation-related jobs? Like what?
Think renewable energy, building wind turbines, installing solar panels, low-carbon technologies, electric vehicles, charging infrastructure, making buildings more energy efficient, expanding the electricity grid, restoring ecosystems like forests and wetlands, which help store carbon, building more resilient infrastructure.
So a big shift in the workforce.
A huge shift. And the report stresses the need for a just transition. Meaning we need to make sure people in affected communities, like those displaced from fossil fuel jobs, have access to training and opportunities in these new growing sectors. It's about ensuring the transition is equitable.
Okay, one last area before we talk solutions. Culture, traditions, things that are maybe less tangible but deeply important. How is climate change affecting those?
This is a really critical and often overlooked impact. The report says climate change is disrupting cultures, heritages, and traditions.
How does that manifest?
Think about communities with deep ties to a specific place, maybe for generations. Climate change can threaten those connections. Think about beloved pastimes like skiing or fishing, changing. Traditional ecological knowledge held by Indigenous peoples, often tied to specific species or seasons, is being disrupted as those patterns change.
So things like salmon runs changing.
Exactly. Like Pacific salmon, which are culturally vital for many tribes in the Northwest, their shifting ranges and declining numbers directly impact culture and subsistence. Also, damage to archaeological sites from erosion or sea level rise impacts on outdoor recreation areas. It all chips away at our heritage, our sense of place, our identity.
It affects the very fabric of communities.
It really does. It's not just about economics or infrastructure. It's about who we are.
Okay, so we've laid out a pretty sobering picture. The warming, the extreme events, the cascading impacts on water, food, health, ecosystems, the economy, even culture. But as you said, reports like NCA5 aren't just about the problems, they're about solutions too. The report says the future is largely in human hands. So what can we do?
That's the crucial pivot, you're right. The report absolutely emphasizes that point. Future climate change impacts depend on choices made today. The more we cut emissions now, the less severe the future impacts will be. It's that simple and that powerful.
Is there any good news on that front? Are we making any progress?
There is some genuinely good news. U.S. emissions did decrease between 2005 and 2019 by about 12%. That's not insignificant.
What drove that decrease?
Primarily shifts in how we generate electricity, moving away from coal, largely towards natural gas, but also, importantly, towards renewables like wind and solar.
And renewables have gotten much cheaper, haven't they?
Dramatically cheaper. The cost of wind power dropped around 70% in the last decade, and solar power plummeted by about 90%. That's a game changer economically. It shows rapid change is possible.
Okay, 12% down since 2005. That sounds good. But is it enough? Is it fast enough to meet the climate goals scientists say we need, like limiting warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius?
Yeah, that's the catch. The report says that rate of decline, which averaged less than 1% per year, is not sufficient. Not nearly sufficient.
What is sufficient?
To have a good shot at limiting warming to those international targets, 1.5 or 2 degrees C, global CO2 emissions need to hit net zero around 2050.
Net zero, meaning we stop adding more CO2 to the atmosphere than we remove.
Exactly. And for the U.S. to do its part, that requires a much steeper decline. We need to be cutting emissions by more than 6% per year on average.
6% per year. Compared to less than 1%, that's a huge acceleration.
It's a very steep climb, but the report is clear that the tools and strategies to do it are available.
Okay, so how do we achieve that kind of rapid cut? What are the main levers the report points to?
It lays out several key strategies, emphasizing that available mitigation strategies can deliver substantial emissions reductions.
What are the big ones?
Number one is decarbonizing electricity generation, basically getting fossil fuels out of the power sector, mostly by massively expanding wind and solar. Then electrifying other sectors, switching transportation cars, trucks, and heating for buildings over to that clean electricity, or potentially using low-carbon fuels like green hydrogen in some cases.
Okay, electricity, transport, buildings.
Energy efficiency is huge too. Just using less energy in our homes, businesses, vehicles. Better urban planning plays a role, designing cities to encourage public transit, walking, biking, reducing the need for cooling.
And what about removing carbon that's already in the atmosphere?
That's the final piece. Improving how we manage land to increase carbon storage. Things like planting forests, afforestation, restoring wetlands, and coastal ecosystems like mangroves, which soak up a lot of carbon.
So it requires a really broad effort. And it sounds like we need to build out clean energy infrastructure incredibly fast.
Faster than we ever have before, yes.
Yeah.
That's a major challenge, but technologically feasible.
Okay, so that's mitigation, cutting emissions. But the report also talks a lot about adaptation. Remind us of the difference and what kind of adaptation is happening or needed.
Right. So mitigation is about stopping the problem from getting worse. Adaptation is about coping with the changes that are already happening or are now unavoidable, even if we do cut emissions.
Adjusting to the new reality, basically.
Exactly. And the report finds that adaptation is happening. Communities are restoring wetlands to buffer storms, upgrading stormwater systems. Farmers are changing planting times. Lots of examples.
But I sense a but coming.
But most of these actions so far have been, quote, incremental and small in scale.
Meaning they're not enough to handle the scale of the changes we're facing.
Pretty much. They're often reactive, dealing with yesterday's problems, not preparing adequately for the future impacts. They're like putting sandbags up when the floodwaters are already rising instead of moving development out of the floodplain altogether.
So what's the alternative? What kind of adaptation is needed?
The report calls for transformative adaptation.
Transformative. That sounds like a big shift.
It is. It means fundamental shifts in systems, values, and practices. Going beyond just coping to actually changing the underlying structures.
You give an example?
Sure. Instead of just relying more heavily on air conditioning during worsening heat waves, which uses more energy, and can make the urban heat island effect worse. Transformative adaptation might involve redesigning buildings and entire neighborhoods with green roofs, reflective surfaces, more trees, better ventilation to reduce the heat burden in the first place.
Okay, a fundamental redesign.
Or instead of just elevating existing homes in flood-prone coastal areas, it might mean rethinking zoning and development policies to actively steer new construction towards safer, higher ground. It might even involve managed retreat in some highly vulnerable areas.
Managed retreat. That's controversial, but probably necessary sometimes.
It's extremely difficult, socially and politically, but yes, in some places, it might be the only sustainable long-term option. Transformative adaptation requires really proactive planning, much better coordination between governments, the private sector, communities. It's a whole-of-society effort.
It sounds incredibly challenging, both mitigation and this transformative adaptation. But does the report see benefits beyond just avoiding climate disaster?
Oh, absolutely. This is a really positive message in the report. These actions, cutting emissions, adapting smartly, they can create systemic cascading benefits.
Like cascading benefits, like what?
Well, think about switching to clean energy and electric vehicles. Yes, it cuts emissions, but it also dramatically improves air quality, which means fewer asthma attacks, lower healthcare costs.
Right, immediate health benefits.
Or investing in energy efficiency saves households and businesses money on their bills. Building better public transit can reduce traffic congestion and accidents. Restoring ecosystems provides recreation opportunities and protects biodiversity. These aren't just climate benefits, they're immediate economic and social wins.
So the investment pays off in multiple ways.
That's the argument. The report strongly suggests that proactive investments in mitigation and adaptation will far outweigh the costs of inaction. It's framed as an opportunity, not just a burden.
And critically important, coming back to that equity point, how do we make sure these benefits, these opportunities, are shared by everyone, especially those communities hit hardest by climate change and often left behind by economic shifts?
Yeah, that concept of a just transition is woven throughout the solutions part of the report. It's not just about what we do, but how we do it.
So what does a just transition look like in practice?
It means designing these transformative actions specifically to address the root causes of climate vulnerability, making sure that the jobs created in the clean energy economy are accessible to everyone, with fair wages and good working conditions.
Addressing workforce disparity.
Exactly. Addressing the existing racial and gender gaps in energy jobs, for example. Providing robust job training and support for workers in communities transitioning away from fossil fuels. Ensuring that things like affordable clean energy, energy efficiency upgrades, and the health benefits of reduced air pollution reach low-income communities and communities of color.
So it's about fairness and inclusion baked into the process.
Precisely. It's about recognizing historical injustices that have made certain communities more vulnerable. It requires meaningful engagement, ensuring communities have a real voice in shaping the solutions that affect them. And it means distributing the resources, the investments, and the opportunities equitably. It's about building a future that's not just climate resilient, but also fundamentally more just and equitable.
Wow, okay, what a deep dive that was. We've really covered a lot of ground. From the unequivocal science of warming and the escalating extreme events to the staggering costs economic and human hitting vulnerable communities hardest, but also, crucially, exploring the pathways forward, the mitigation strategies, the need for transformative adaptation, and the potential for cascading benefits if we pursue a truly just transition. We really see that we have the knowledge, we have the tools, we have strategies to make huge changes.
I think that's the key takeaway. This assessment paints a picture of urgency, absolutely. The climate crisis is here, and it's serious. But it also lays out a picture of immense opportunity. The choices we make now, you make, individually, collectively, through demanding action, those choices will genuinely shape the future we inhabit. It makes clear that a resilient, prosperous, and just future is achievable. It won't be easy, it requires courage, collaboration, real systemic change. But it's possible.
So, as we wrap up, here's something to think about, drawn directly from the report's findings. It suggests that continued action to reduce emissions can avoid the worst impacts of climate change and provide valuable benefits, no matter what global warming level is reached or exceeded. Think about that. Every action matters. Every fraction of a degree of warming we avoid reduces harm and brings benefits. So what does that mean for the choices you make starting today? And maybe more importantly, how can you, in your community, in your work, in your life, help ensure that the benefits of climate action truly reach everyone, especially those who need them?